Evening. Welcome to House Groups. We are continuing in our Lost and Found series on the book of Luke. We are looking at just 3 verses actually this week in chapter 9. It's where Jesus is with his disciples and he says, "Who do the crowds say I am?" And they say, "Well, they think you're a whole bunch of these prophets and kind of this great teacher guy." But he says to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter responds, "You are God's Messiah." Now, this is a question I think that every single person on planet Earth needs to answer. Who do we say Jesus is? And the reality is we need to find out. Every person needs to find out who he really is. We don't all get to just determine or decide for ourselves who we think Jesus is. Like, how crazy would it be if you got in your small group tonight and you all sat around and talked about who is David Sorn? And one of you said, David Sorn is a professional athlete. Well, first of all, thank you. And if someone else said, no, I think David Sorn is just an idea. Right? Well, it's ridiculous because clearly I am one defined thing, right? Each person doesn't get to decide who I am in their own mind. Now, let me make a clarification here. Now, every person probably has a slightly varied different impression of me, just to give a different impression of everyone, right? Some of you maybe have a positive impression of me, or your impression of me is too high. For some of you, you have a negative impression of me. Well, different impressions, but some of those impressions are false and some are true. There is one, I'm a defined thing, right? And yet, I think we continue to just dangerously move towards this idea where we each get to determine in our own minds who Jesus really is. And I see this even more in the church. There's a college professor out there named Scott McKnight, and he administers a certain test to his group of incoming students every single year. And the test begins with a series of questions. I think there are 24 questions to the students about what they think Jesus is like. And so he'll ask them, is Jesus moody? Does Jesus get nervous? Is he the life of the party? Is he an introvert? And then those 24 questions are then followed by another series of questions with slightly altered language in which the students then answer questions about their own personality. In fact, McKnight, the professor, is not the only person who's administered this test. It's been field tested by a number of other professionals as well, and the results are remarkably consistent no matter who they're administering the test to. And guess what the results are? I bet you probably know. Everyone seems to think that Jesus is just like them. Professor McKnight, the guy who originally came up with this, he added, the test suggests that even though we like to think that we're becoming more like Jesus, the reverse is actually probably more the case. We try and make Jesus like ourselves. This is what the French philosopher Voltaire said, centuries ago. He said, in the beginning, God created man in his own image, and man has been trying to repay the favor ever since. We try and make God in our image. We want him to look like us. I think this is such a good word to our culture in America in 2019. We want God to look like us. We don't want to adjust to his standards, to his character, to his morals. And so we would rather adjust God to fit our morals. And so we adapt him to fit our image. Now, churches have been doing this for centuries, and I'll tell you what history tells us about this, that this idea of adapting God to fit us always results in death. It results in death of a church. It results in death of a denomination every time in history. But revival in history always starts with those who go back to the Bible, with those who say, I don't want to be like the crowds. I don't want to say that God is just who I want him to be. Revival starts with those who say, I want to get close to God. I want to study him, and I want to find out who he really is. And I pray that you do that, and I pray that we do that as a church. Amen.